So if you start at Monger, you're going to get introduced to Andy when the insurance review arises. If you start with Andy, you're going to get introduced to Monger when the contract review question comes up. And similarly with verification and certification with the MSP Alliance. But working with all three organizations, each of us individually will be focusing on our part, but together you get a comprehensive risk management solution because we're all working together for a common purpose, which is to protect the MSP. Our customer contracts work hand in hand with the insurance policies and defense that UConn's insurance policies and their carriers provide. Charles's organization gives us the maturity data and the documentation to defend cases successfully in court. All of these things work together to keep the MSP protected, to keep claims low so insurance can be affordable, and MSPs that invest in moving up this maturity ladder get to benefit from savings in terms of their cost.
Welcome to the MSP Zone. Today, we are talking about a topic that affects every MSP, regardless of size, market, or technical focus. And of course, I'm talking about maturity. Most MSPs focus on growth, but growth and maturity are not the same thing. Mature MSPs build processes, accountability, and resilience into every part of their MSP practice. And they understand that operations, cybersecurity, compliance, legal agreements, and risk management are all interconnected. Weaknesses in one area eventually create exposure in another. That's why today's conversation is so important. MSP Alliance, Monger, and UConn each work with MSPs from different perspectives, but we're all focused on helping providers build more mature businesses, whether that's operational excellence and certification, stronger legal protections, or effective risk transfer through insurance. These disciplines work best when they are aligned. So I'm very happy to have Rob Scott from Monger and Andy Runyon from UConn. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Charles. It's great to be here.
Yeah, appreciate you having us on today.
Look, this is not going to be a Joe Rogan 3-hour marathon, although we probably could. Maybe
probably could if we wanted to. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Maybe pop open some of that Island rum that you like, Rob. No, but seriously, I'm going to try to cram as much information into the time that we have. So I'm just going to dive right in and maybe start with not necessarily an easy question, but I'd like both of your opinions on what does MSP maturity mean to each of you? I mean, Rob, you want to, when I say that, what do you think of first? MSP maturity.
Look, when I think of maturity, it's like, what are the people that have been there and have a lot of experience doing? You know, we talk about maturity a lot when it comes to operations. You know, people think of it as, for example, OML, but maturity is, extends into risk management and compliance. And, being mature is implementing the best practices that are designed to protect the business, to lock in its ability to grow, to lock in its revenues and maximize its opportunity in terms of value creation when it's time to exit. And so, these things are best practices for a reason because they help you unlock more value. And so that's what I think about when I think about maturity.
Andy, you want to take a shot?
No, it's good stuff. Well, first of all, I'll tell you what maturity is not from our seat. In my arena and in my role, I get to work with, depending on the week, 10 to 20 MSPs a week where we really get into the weeds. And what I've found over the last 5 years is maturity is not the MSP who has the most sales guys and the highest revenue. It is not that at all, right? When I look at maturity, we're asking questions to Rob's point, and to what Monger does. What do your services look like? Are you still stuck in the old break fix model? Are you still have print copy footprint from the 1990s, or are we all under, or is everybody, under a managed services contract, right? How do you document those things? What does the stack look like? Are we helping folks with things like pen testing and IR planning, or are we just trying to sell them something, right? Are we really trying to help our customers become resilient, or are we just trying to sell them something? And then how internally is the MSP mitigating and transferring risk both at the same time, right? Not one without the other. But from the insurance side of the fence, when we look at an MSP, maturity to us means how does that MSP actively mitigate and transfer risk, in cohesion? And I'll tell you, I've seen some MSPs that have 20 customers do it a lot better than some MSPs that have 200.
So, Rob, is that really? I mean, I'm asking you a leading question of all people. The notion that maturity is not related to size would be of significant pride bruising to a lot of MSPs out there. We know probably a number of them. Do you believe that? And is that an issue that can be fixed?
I believe that many of the large MSPs that we review their contracts, we find that they're unprotected on our score, which is at the bottom of our maturity ladder. So I just, without, casting any judgment, the volume of MSAs that we're looking at, we're not seeing a high number of MSAs that are passing our basic MSA scorecard. I think the highest score that we've received so far is 55%. It includes PE-backed opcos. So I really don't think that we're seeing a high correlation between legal maturity and size, although we have clients that are very large at a high legal maturity, and we have very small companies as clients that are at a high level of maturity, and size right now is not the primary indicator of where they may be along that ladder.
So just because they are big in size, high revenue, high growth rates, don't assume that they're mature. They could be, but that in and of itself is not going to be an indicator, is what I'm hearing.
That's correct.
And you agree with that?
Yes, sir. And I mean, if we button even down further into the specific insurance piece, which is our, involvement at UConn, I will see, MSPs that come to us with less than $1 million in revenue that have really done their research. And I mean, I know this is going to sound trivial, but I mean, even going to places like Reddit, to find out where do I find comprehensive insurance solutions, right? We'll see MSPs that'll come to us less than $1 million in revenue and have really, really solid, mature insurance programs, right? And have a good understanding of how their legal interactions deal with their transference of risk through insurance. And then we'll work with MSPs that are in the tens of millions of revenue, and they'll still have an insurance policy that has been auto-renewed since 2015, right? It'll be low limits. It'll have missing coverages. It'll have sublimited coverage. There'll be entire line items like dependent business interruption and cybercrime that are massive in 2026. I mean, think about how AI and interconnectivity has changed the game over the last 3 to 4 years. We'll see MSPs come to us that are very mature in revenue, nice size MSPs that'll be missing the transference piece totally on third-party connectivity and artificial intelligence. So yes, from the insurance side, I would say we see the same.
Ask this to anyone out there watching this, listening to this, who think, here's another theoretical thing that Rob and Charles have been talking about for 20 plus years. And Rob, I'm thinking back to March 31st in Atlanta at MSP World, when the guy in the audience told you and I still do relationships with the handshake, forget contracts. That would be an insult to my clients if I asked them to sign a piece of paper. Fast forward to today, to those of you who are thinking that this is academic, what we are talking about is no longer held within the confines of the MSP channel. Everybody outside the IT channel who can do serious harm to us through regulation, through policy influence, they are now paying very close attention. And I wouldn't say they're experts, but they're coming to the table with a fair amount of information that's, for the most part, accurate. So, Rob, I want to ask you a question. From that day in 2008 to today, what has changed in my mind has been that the MSP, and I didn't see this coming, or if I did, I wouldn't have articulated it in this way, have become risk management companies to some degree. What are your thoughts on that? General thought.
Let's just say to a much greater degree. If you think about the risk profile of standing up a managed services practice in 2010 versus in 2026, like just the sheer regulatory environment, the nature of the way the insurance markets work, all of the risk balancing and compliance stuff that we've been talking about. You've got a whole different animal of concerns to worry about from a risk mitigation perspective. And what I mean is that, your value is going to be determined on a risk adjusted basis. Almost anybody with a truck and any skills can go get a customer for managed services. That doesn't make it a business. That doesn't make it something that you can sell at value if you build it up. And so I think that on a risk adjusted basis, I tell MSPs, you're in a strange business. You're taking on all or most of the risk and you're getting a fraction of the money. Like, what's your margin in Microsoft? So the idea that you would take on a lot of extra risk and responsibility became a project that me and my team started working on, 20 plus years ago, which is how can you create the appropriate boundaries between the MSP and their customer so that the MSP can be responsible for the things it should be responsible for, and the customer understands and agrees that the MSP is not responsible for example, the criminal acts of third parties, or to stand as insurer against any actors that are, cause injuries that are not the MSP's fault. And so this concept around how to mitigate risk in managed services has developed. But as you point out, Charles, the world doesn't share it with us. We've seen in court, like, we're scratching our heads at the things that people will argue in court, and the world has changed. We're dealing with more litigation for MSPs today than ever in our 20 plus years of representing MSPs.
So, Andy, following up on what Rob just said, I want to give a concrete example for people out there. Most people already know this, but maybe many don't, right? Starting in late 2000s to the 2020s, like around the pandemic, I distinctly remember MSPs were starting to really come to the table to us and say, hey, we're starting to pick up a lot of cyber insurance form requests.
Yep.
I said, do you do this as a profession? He goes, no, we're just being given them to fill out.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what Rob is talking about in terms of they're shouldering all this risk, and they weren't. I think today they're doing better, starting to monetize that. But what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, that's a great question. And one thing I want to be really clear about up on the front end, there is, I at least I as the insurance professional, I don't see risk in that application itself as long as they're just advising, right? Now, the application is an indicator that MSP work is becoming more risky. As long as, just to hit directly on that application, because this is a major thing in the industry right now. If your customer comes to you and says, hey, I have this application, I've got to renew my cyber insurance, or I've got to get it, and I don't know how to fill out this application, can you help me? First of all, never touch that thing. Don't fill it out for them. Don't sign off on it for them. That is extremely risky, right? Walking them through it, telling them what they have, advising them, helping them fill it out, that there's nothing wrong with that. But the application itself and what it was before in 2019 versus what it is in 2026, the story behind that tells a very, very strong narrative that MSP work is becoming more risky. In 2019, for some carriers, there was no app to get cyber insurance. You literally put your name, your address, your revenue, your website, and you sent your quote in, and you got, you sent your app in and you got your quote. The question, do you have multi-factor authentication, yes or no? Which, by the way, I believe to be a horrific question. But that question didn't come into underwriting until 2020 to 2021 regularly, right? Now, today, as it stands, that question is, do you use MFA in your environment? Is it on emails? Is it on backups? Is it on logins? What vendor do you use, right? And that right there tells you that something has changed. The way those questions are being asked, the severity of those questions, the length of the application, right? We know Sophos just released last week. Sophos just released their annual state of ransomware report. I posted it on LinkedIn earlier this week. The average ransomware event now runs $1.72 million, right? Rewind 10 years ago, I don't know what the number was, right? I wasn't in the industry then, but you guys were. But I would guess that the number was in probably the low hundreds of thousands. That number is probably 10x in 2026 what it was in 2013 or 2014. So because the losses have increased and because the severity of those losses and frequency of those losses has increased, not only has risk increased on the MSP and their role, but insurance has started looking to the MSP to help them reduce that risk at the client level.
And therein lies the opportunity, in my opinion. And Rob, you said something, I'm going to butcher it, but you said something to me about, first rule in practicing law, you don't go to jail. You make sure the client goes to jail. You're not, right? It would sound bad if you're a defense attorney, but your point was...
Number one rule of law firms, if anyone goes to jail, make sure it's the client.
There you go. So I think that phrase could very easily be applied to the MSP because, as Andy just said, right? I mean, what filling out a cyber insurance form is one thing. Taking responsibility and signing for it and attesting to its veracity is a completely different thing. And so this is an introduction to a new theme here of the contracts between MSPs and their customers now appears to be evolving yet again from not just a simple service catalog, but to this is what we're doing for you, but we are not able to take on the responsibility that you as the customer have from any of the many sources that are now placing that responsibility on their shoulders. Mm-hmm. What are your just general thoughts about that phenomenon?
Well, look, I think there's stated, another way, there's an increased need for clarity given the increased complexity in which the MSP operates from both a regulatory and market risk perspective. We've got to look at what regulations are you and your customers subject to. There are data processing terms that have to be entered into. We need to look carefully at who are your vendors. We need specific provisions based on the exact type of cloud provisions or backups that you offer. It's very, very nuanced and very MSP specific. And the requirement that we get specific is the need to protect the MSPs from this emerging concept within the market that, number one, if there's a security incident, it's the MSP's fault. And number two, the MSP is responsible for everything regardless of fault.
Bingo.
Yeah,
that's it, man. And yes, and I mean, I want to piggyback off of that real quick because here's why. And I think and in my world, I know the Mastagni-Holstedt versus Lantec case out of California, a couple years ago really, enlightened me and blew the topic, wide open, especially on places like Reddit and the MSP channel and things like that. But here's the deal. Think back, I mean, Rob, on the legal side and Charles with these contracts and handshake agreements and things like that, 15 years ago, was anybody telling their customers that they had to carry cyber insurance? Nobody was. Nobody. No. I mean, the adoption of cyber insurance was so low at the SMB level. No MSPs were saying, hey, if we're going to work together, I need you to carry insurance now. It's a standard operating procedure in 2026. And here's why. There are losses in 2025 and 2026 that have happened widespread that have nothing to do with the MSP, that the MSP could not have done anything to prevent, that are severely impactful at the client level. And does that client know that it wasn't the MSP's fault? Like, let's look at CDK Global, for example, right? But car dealerships nationwide went down for 15, 20 days, couldn't sell a car because they didn't have access to their CRM and their F&I tool, right? Now, that outage, think about your average car dealer. And I'm not trying to, if anybody out there has got family or friends in car dealers, right? Or car dealership land or an auto land, but think about the average car owner, right? He's down for 4 days. He hadn't sold a car. And in his brain, he knows that he's paying thousands of dollars to this MSP to stop this from happening. He's on the phone going, get me back up. This is on you. And the reality of it is the MSP has nothing to do with it, right? So having those contracts in place, clearly stating you need I have insurance for me, but you need insurance for you, because there are losses out there, invoice manipulation, third-party business interruption, right? Like that don't really have anything to do with me, that you could experience a loss and still be out money, out revenue, and I don't need you dragging me into court for things that don't involve me, right?
Rob, I think that Andy makes a good point, and I'd ask you now, to Andy's point, are we getting closer to being able to define where that line is of, we talked about earlier in the episode, maturity, right? And through some of the litigation projects we've been involved in, there have been some really crazy attempts to draw that line so far out. How are we doing in that fight, in your opinion?
We're fighting hard, Charles. I think it's all the bad cases with the bad facts that make it harder for MSPs in court. The other thing is, like, what is second nature to us sounds like gobbledygook to most arbitrators or judges. And so any, decent lawyer can make it sound very sinister that the MSP is not doing things or shouldn't be doing things at the end of the term, which is where we see a lot of the disputes. Client wants to get off at the end of the term. They want to, or before, they want to terminate for convenience. They haven't paid in 90 days. They've got a very specific demand about how they want to be offboarded, and the expectations in the market of, what we think are managed services and the way we grew up in the industry, those notions are not shared in the general market. And the lawyers that represent MSPs have no clue. And in many times, the tribunals in which these cases get tried are relying on experts like Charles to explain to them what all this stuff means. And when you're in that kind of a world, there's a lot of risk. Even if you win, you can lose. And that's why I think the insurance is so important, because if anyone can go to court and point the finger at you and make it really expensive for you to prove that it's not your fault, that's the ideal role for professional liability insurance, which covers the cost of defending claims that you were at fault in the event of an injury. And that's the tech E&O policy that's so important when it comes to maturity. Like, do you have the basic protections in place, the right insurance with the right coverage? Do you have good dynamic, not static contracts? And where are you on your ability to show third-party attestation about your internal controls? If you have all three of those things in place, in other words, if you let each of the three of us help you through our customer success journey, when you wind up on the other side, you will have a mature MSP when it comes to risk management, because all three pillars of that protection will be in place and activated. In the event that you have an incident, you'll survive it. It's not where you're just playing roulette every day.
Rob, I'm going to ask one follow-up question, and then Andy, I'll switch to you. Do you believe that with the appropriate insurance and the appropriate contracts, that when a spurious claim or one of the intellectuals on Reddit, advises someone to go and sue their MSP, for some idiotic reason, I say that in jest, obviously, is it your opinion that those two things, well designed and working in conjunction, and obviously certification to prove those things, that the chances of a quick, expedient, and successful outcome, even if it's a dismissal, a judgment favorable to the MSP in that situation, that is more likely to happen, not just a prolonged, protracted type of a battle?
100%. And the reason is there's fewer things to fight over, like comprehensive agreements, right? Bulletproof ticket analytics and internal controls that are well documented, together with the support of the right carrier, are going to keep your claims low. If you have a dispute, your chances of early resolution are greatly magnified. And let me tell you, at my age, I try to keep MSPs out of court, not in court. And the goal for me is to make sure that the legal industry does not artificially drive up the claims experience of MSPs. Because too often in the claims process, the law firms are getting paid hourly and they work on discounted hourly rates, but at the end you get a giant bill and that goes against your history. And ultimately my clients will end up with the bill. And so my goal is to work with you, Charles, and you, Andy, to make sure that together we're protecting MSPs. So when that inevitable finger pointing happens, they've got the right defense in place with the right contracts, the right insurance, and the right proof so that we can dispose of those matters often before they ever turn into full disputes. And if they turn into disputes, to resolve them promptly and at a low possible total cost so that everyone's claims experience is kept low and that we can prove that through the combination of the services that we're describing, MSPs can enjoy better insurance, more affordable with more coverage, with the right approach to managing those claims on the backside. So that's why I'm so excited about this program, because it accomplishes everything that I think an MSP needs to have a proper risk management solution in place in 2026, which is like wild, wild west, crazy.
I can't think of a better argument for the lower maturity. That sounds bad, but companies that want to advance their maturity, Rob, I think that's the perfect encapsulation of why they should do that. Andy, myths, cyber insurance myths. I want to talk about some of the crazy stuff that I've heard, and I've heard from some cyber carriers. I've heard so much contradictory stuff over a 10-year period from your industry. And I hate to say your industry, but what would you say are some of the bigger cyber insurance myths?
Yeah. And real quick, before we dive into that, I do want to piggyback off of one thing that Rob said very quickly, right? Kind of going to the maturity thing and talking about, how this ties into insurance. Two pictures. If you've got an MSP whose clientele is uninsured and they are grabbing from an a la carte stack and they're doing backups, but they're not doing MFA or MDR, and they're not under a Rob Scott Monger MSA. Guys, you see where I'm going with this, right? Like if they have a loss and they're not insured and they're not controlled well and they're not under contract, that's the primordial suit for a hell of an E&O claim, right? Now, flip that over on its head. They've got insurance. They have a better chance of being made whole. They've got excellent controls because we gave them a universal, solid stack. There's a better chance of that loss to fit in the limits of that insurance. On top of that, they have insurance. They've got a great stack. They're also under contract. So when they try to go sue, their lawyer looks at what they've signed off on and goes, I don't want to fight against this in court, right? So when we talk about operational maturity, to me, that's it, right? It's understanding how all these things go together. Do you have good insurance? Do you have good contracts? Do you have a universal stack? Or are you just letting people tell you what they want to do? And do you make sure that they're insured? If we're doing those things, that's a mature MSP. If we're 0 for 4, that's an immature MSP, regardless of what revenue. Anyway, okay. Sorry, I just had to get that out because some stuff that Rob said there. That's what literally it's what we talk about every day. Biggest myth right now. A number one myth in 2026. I'm not going to call out any names, but for some of you that are out there will know what I'm talking about. There is a particular entity that helps quite a bit with things like marketing that has obviously provided information to their MSP base right now where many of them are posting that 45% of cyber insurance claims are being denied right now. That is complete and utter bull hockey.
This is coming from a marketing company?
It has to be because here's I'm not much of a conspiracy theorist. Here's my conspiracy theory hat on this. I have seen the same post posted on LinkedIn by different MSPs and different footprints around the country, and they all use the same number. Every one of them says 45% of cyber insurance claims are being denied. Now, here's what's fun. Is you have people like me and people like you guys, right, that are the devil's advocates, that are the whatever you want to call it, the contrarians in the group, that are immediately diving into the comments and going, great, 45% are being denied, show us the stats. Please cite your resources, right? And nobody has been able to do it so far. What I can tell you is that, well, I'm going to use CFC as an example. Let's give a specific market and a specific example. At the end of 2024, this is 2 years ago, right? But at the end of 2024, the 2025 data, CFC released an entire report. They paid 99% of their cyber insurance claims. Claims are getting paid by and large, right? They are getting paid. You have these stories, these boogeyman stories about denials. Do they happen? Absolutely, they happen, right? Can you just blatantly lie on your application and get your cyber insurance policy to cover it? No, you can't, right? But it is not nearly at the tick that people think that they are. Guys, internally as a wholesaler that operates nationwide in 2025, we had one denial, one disputed in a year. Claims are not getting denied at the rate that people think that they are.
What's the motive, Andy? Like, why would someone say 45% reject denial?
Because the narrative is that if you miss one question on your application, your claim's going to get denied. Therefore, you need me as the MSP to help you with that application and sell you everything on it, right? And listen,
it's an MSP sales pitch, is what you're saying.
And here's the thing. Here's the thing. There's truth in that. It's just like anything else, right? Like, I'm a baseball coach. If I come to you and I say, hey, if you really want to throw hard, man, you got to go out and you got to pitch all year long and you got to throw heavy balls. There's some truth to that. But guess what? You could also have Tommy John surgery too, if that's the case. So there's some truth in the idea that there are claims that are out there that are denied when people grossly miss a test. Like if the question is, do you have MFA? Where's it located? Is it on, yada, yada, yada. And you just go, yes. And you have a ransomware event and forensic shows up and there's not a stitch of MFA on the entire environment, yeah, you're probably going to get denied. That does not happen very often, right? What does happen is you may answer yes to a question about MFA. You may have one employee that's recently been, onboarded that maybe they hadn't set up their MFA on their email yet or something like that. We're not getting gross denials there, right? So I think where it comes from is a sales pitch, and there is a strategy where MSPs can push into cyber insurance and increase MRR. I believe that. I help MSPs with that every single day. I think you can do that without making bogus claims about insurance denials.
I agree with that. I would also say that the MSP has infinite upside opportunity to just say, look, I'm going to help you not get rejected, not have your premiums go through the roof by becoming more cyber hygienic. But, well, that's a separate conversation.
Well,
Rob,
and I just, sorry, before we move on, I just to come back, because we talked about boogeyman, right? The thing that people are missing, they're focusing on the denials. The things that people are missing is people are underinsuring themselves. I'll run back to that 1.72 average, right?
Yeah.
They're focusing on denials that aren't happening as much. The biggest issue is people are having losses that exceeds their limits of insurance, right? That's not a denial. The insurance is paying out, but you've got a 1.72 million average bill, and the average SMB insures itself to the tune of about $750,000, somewhere between 500K and $1 million.
Which brings us back to the contract, because if I was a shrewd individual and I wanted to make sure that my contracts were effective, I might come up with an ingenious way to embed insurance details into the contract and have a very comprehensive risk strategy portrayed in that agreement. Rob, am I totally crazy for thinking that that's possible?
Well, look, I think that it's important to align your risk balancing provisions, the indemnity, the insurance, and the limitation of liability. I believe that Tech E&O is the primary and should be the primary risk transfer mechanism. And to Andy's point, if you've got under $2 million in coverage, you're probably potentially underinsured. So take a look at that. The other thing that's important is that your limitation of liability can distinguish between covered and uncovered claims. Because if you have a covered claim, you're going to want your customer to be able to have access to the coverage to become whole, if it's truly triggered and appropriate. And if it's an uncovered claim, you're not going to have anywhere but your own pocket to pay. And so you need to make sure you keep it low enough to where it doesn't become a bet the company problem if you have a coverage dispute.
But
And
you can
so
articulate those in the contract, is what you're saying.
100% risk balancing provisions that are critical to this point include indemnity, insurance, and limitations of liability.
And I can tell you why that's critical to have in a contract is because we see the misconceptions live on the ground level, right? I think you both heard me tell this story before, but was dealing one time with the CFO of a decent sized electric company. They run about 40 or 50 million in revenue. They had just recently onboarded an MSP for the first time, right? When they onboarded that MSP, they came to us and said, "Hey, we can drop our cyber insurance now." And we were just, like almost choked on our tongue. We were like, "What? I'm sorry." And they were like, "Well, the MSP told us that they had insurance." The MSP did the right thing. They went out, they bought good E&O, good cyber. They showed a certificate of insurance to their customer in good faith, right? And they said, "Well, they protect us now and they have insurance, so we don't need to carry our insurance anymore." Right? Because in their mind, they were protected by the MSP from any loss happening, and the MSP was ensured that if a loss did happen, because they could just take them to court, right? So having that in the contract that we're going to carry our own insurance and you need to carry your own insurance. And then, here's going back to the previous comment, they need to understand that there are losses out there. There are potential losses out there that would have nothing to do with the MSP, right?
Not just
Somebody
potential, the statistically highest probability losses would not be the MSP's responsibility.
Give me an example, just if something comes to
Employee negligence. Let's just go in order of most likely. Yeah. Employee negligence, 43%.
Employee uploads confidential information belonging to the company
clicks on the wrong link, writes the password on a sticky note and gets, the cleaning lady steals whatever. 43% of incidents are employee negligence.
Pays the invoice from a bad actor that was not inside the environment. They just chose an email and they mirrored a third party that they've got on their website that says, "Hey, we do business with these guys." So they spoof an email, say, "Hey, pay us 80 grand. Here's the new bank account." And the employee pays it, right? Like that's nothing to do with the MSP. And that right there is probably the largest rise and largest increase over the last 3 years in cyber insurance claims. The social engineering driven invoice manipulation. When I cut my teeth in the late 2010s in this thing, that was not even being discussed. It was all ransomware, right? AI has driven that piece through the roof over the last 3 years. It has nothing to do with the MSP. You can have a completely and totally isolated event where you have a managed client that refuses to go through the SAT. They won't do any type of security awareness training or anything like that, right? And a bad actor just spoofs a third party, sends them an invoice, and they just pay it. And the lady in accounting feels bad because it's a Friday and she doesn't want to ruin everybody's weekend. So she sits on it until Monday and the money's in the Caymans. Nothing to do with the MSP.
Yeah. And so the second biggest category is the criminal acts of third parties. So that makes up a huge piece of the rest. It includes the category he just mentioned, together with ransomware, and ransomware attacks and business email compromises combined make up the balance of the majority of the other incidents that an MSP's customers would face. So it's not just that there are claims that could happen that aren't the MSP's fault. The high probability is that there will be a claim that is not the MSP's fault. And if you're on Monjur agreements, it's an even higher probability just because of the way we define with specificity those boundaries between the MSP and your customer.
Look, Rob, I know we could spend a ton of time on this, but I want for people out there to understand how supremely important what you just said really is, because the difference between a contract that does not cover that third-party criminal acts limitation, what would that practically look like in terms of a threatened claim against the MSP by a uneducated, unknowing attorney?
This is the real fact pattern. MSP has an agreement with the customer. Customer gets ransomware, calls the MSP in the middle of the night. The MSP investigates. The ransomware is $3,500. The cost to remediate is $30,000. MSP says, "What do you want to do?" I think it's maybe more cost effective to pay the ransomware. MSP's customer says, you're the MSP, do the remediation. It doesn't say here that I have to pay you for the remediation. So it's your 30.
Do it for free.
Mine, get on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do it for free. So that was like real world case. That's what caused me to start putting ransomware provisions into the Mondra agreements, because I want the ransomware provision to say that the MSP is not responsible for any ransomware attacks and is not going to get involved in negotiating with the criminals. And if the customer wants to pay, they can pay. And if they don't want to pay and they want the MSP to remediate, then it's clearly at their then prevailing rates, and only if they accept the engagement in writing, which they're not obligated to do. So,
well, and that's where good modern insurance should step in, not the in those scenarios, right? And we're negotiating with a bad actor. Every modern carrier has got those negotiators on panel and is a part of the incident response, right? So what part of what you pay your premium for, right? Good modern insurance. If you, we don't ever suggest that somebody should or shouldn't pay a ransom, right? It all comes down to the individual claim scenario, right? But if you find yourself in a spot where you have to pay a ransom, good insurance is written on a pay on behalf form, right? Where your premium has already, gone to that limit and they pay on your behalf. So it really shouldn't be at the feet of the MSP at that point, right? The MSP should be involved. They should know, they should be notified, right? But the insurance company, if you've got a ransomware event and there has to be a negotiation or a payment or something like that, that should then be handed over to hopefully a CFC or a coalition or a Tokyo Marine or somebody that has a modern approach to cyber insurance.
And I think that sometimes MSPs don't fully appreciate the importance of the claims handling aspects of these different carriers. We've got a client this week suffering ransomware attack, the potentially widespread, and we're getting feedback from the carrier like, we need, 3 days to get involved. So not all claims operations.
Not all created equal. Not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. Really good point. Andy, you brought up AI, so I
Yes,
feel
sir.
like we should talk about it.
Yep.
We are, at least the current administration seems to be under the posture of U.S., speaking only of the U.S. market, U.S. dominance in artificial intelligence with minimal regulatory interference, whatever that means, to be decided later. It is undeniable that AI is impacting, I think, mostly for good, MSPs. Some people debate whether that's good for society and the human race, but that's a separate topic for another podcast, not MSP Zone. I would like to talk about and get your opinions for both of you about how AI is changing the MSP business model. And Rob, maybe you could address that from a legal standpoint. Then I'd like to hear, Andy, your thoughts about how it's creeping into your job in underwriting for insurance.
Well, legally, I would just start with shadow AI is the biggest concern. You've got a network that you're responsible for, and you've got customers using tools that are very powerful and maybe using them in ways that are very ill-advised from a cyber hygiene perspective. And so I would start there that, this AI frontier is many companies taking a shoot first, ask questions later perspective. And these open AI systems are not terribly safe or secure. And so I think of the MSP's opportunity is to extend their expertise in cybersecurity into the realm of AI so that they can help customers get the benefit of AI and protect them from some of the well-known challenges around hallucinations, guardrails, compliance, and security. And so I think that all of us are concerned about shadow AI and its impact. Also from a legal perspective, many MSPs are now transitioning into AI-related services, but their contracts are written for a non-AI world. And the problem then arises, you don't have even the right terminology in the agreement to allocate the risk and responsibilities among the parties unless you have an agreement purpose-built for the delivery of AI services. And even an extremely well-written MSA or a service attachment or SOW for IT managed services is likely not to contain the important provisions to protect an MSP who's embarking on advising clients or supporting clients around AI solutions. And so that's the biggest concern that we have.
Good. No, it's good. Excellent point. Andy, your take on that.
Yeah, no, and I love how you shaped the question. It's funny. I'm just coming off of vacation. Shout out to Sundog Books in Seaside, Florida. We always go when we're down on annual vacation, and we grab a book at Sundog Books, right? And the book that I grabbed this year, which I'm still in, so I can't give a opinion on whether it's good or not. Good so far, is called The God Test by Robert Wright, and it's about AI, right? Like and the way you shaped it is exactly how Robert Wright starts the book, which is saying, half of the world thinks that we're going to live in this utopic society because of AI and there's going to be no sickness and we're going to have universal income and all this wonderful stuff, right? And the other half is like, humanity's going to be dead by 2080, right? Like, I mean, there's two very polarizing sides on that. And I'll tell you, where our MSPs are falling today. I mentioned earlier in the talk that I talked to, 10, 15, 20 a week. Where our MSPs are at today are very solidly in the middle, right? Rob mentioned they are using it internally. Some are using it down at the customer level. I would say right now, today in 2026, the majority of MSPs are using AI internally to get leaner, meaner, faster, and drive margins, right? Like that's and try to make themselves a faster operating company, right? Fewer MSPs aren't using it at all or going full to the teeth all the way down to the customer, right? But even using it internally introduces additional risks, to Rob's point, that may not be reflected in your contracts or in your insurance, right? Even if all you're doing is using AI to take in tickets, right? If that's it, right? I was talking with a buddy. I was down in Little Rock, and he's long in the tooth, been in the MSP game for 30 plus years, has done all kinds of stuff. And we were talking about their AI usage. And he said, man, really right now, so like our AI bot is just taking in tickets. And if it's low level, if it's not a big deal, it's kicking it to a tier 1. It sits with that tier 1 until they either triage it or they get to a point to where they need to elevate it to a tier 2. If it comes in and it's severe enough, it just goes directly to a tier 2. And I said, okay, well, let me play devil's advocate with you. What happens if it's a ransomware event and it comes in Saturday morning at 2:00 and it's supposed to go to a tier 2, but for some reason the AI bot sends it to a tier 1 and it sits on his desk sits in his inbox till he rolls in late on Monday morning. And we've got a ransomware event that's unattended and festering for 48 hours, right? That's obviously risk to the MSP, right? So, I mean, again, that's a worst case scenario, but yeah, even if you're just using it internally, and I would argue, I've made the point a couple of times, this actually is not my idea. Somebody told me one time, they said, if MSPs say they're not using AI internally, they're lying to you. They may just not know it. I guarantee you their employees are using ChatGPT and Claude, right? And they're putting company information in there. So yeah, there's risk there, and contracts and insurance need to evolve and mature with that risk.
But okay, I accept what both of you said, but and Rob, Shadow IT absolutely exists. I think Andy, you echoed that as well. But I am also hearing, and I'd like your opinions, both of you, on this one, is that the MSPs are absolutely fielding inbound questions from every customer they have saying, how should I incorporate AI? And that is not a managed service yet. It's not like something out of the managed services textbook. And so, Rob, are you seeing that? And B, what should the response be? And how do you contract that into the relationship?
Look, I mean, we're contracting now for every type of relationship, from readiness assessment to implementation, testing, development. And we do have clients that have developed playbooks and turned agentic platforms into managed services. And so I think we're starting to see early evidence of this rise of the view of a managed service provider as someone who manages agents that manage networks. And
right.
To me, it's not that different than managing agents that used to be installed on boxes to get data off of boxes. It's just a different agent to manage. But there are many MSPs that are really ahead in the race in terms of their agentic adoption. And there are many MSPs that are building very fastly growing practices offering AI consulting, implementation, app development, and agentic orchestration services on recurring revenue basis. And our agreements accommodate all of those use cases.
Andy, are you seeing, well, let me ask this. Are the MSPs in the MSP Alliance powered by Yukon program getting protected by AI, getting protected from AI related issues? Because that's probably something that most carriers may not yet be catching up to.
No, there are options out there. We have 3 markets at this point that have come to us and have here. Let me just kind of give you the lay of the land on insurance. From insurance, you're either going to have negative language, positive language, or silent language on any issue, right? Negative language means they're going to exclude AI. Like it's going to be express written in the policy. Hey, any losses related to artificial intelligence, we're not going to cover it, right? We don't offer a single policy that has negative language. Why would we, right? In this current market, there are policies out there, right? You can, if you're not careful, run into a policy through a general broker that has an AI exclusion in it, but we don't even. It's there, but we don't dabble in those markets. Silent language is most common. And what silent language means is that the carrier is either going to, the AI is not called out, right? It's not said negative or positive. And the carrier takes the position, right, that it falls within the general professional acts of the company. And what we get verbally from the carriers, and we meet with them regularly, is like, hey, there's nothing to worry about. I know we haven't called it out, but like, it's in there because it's a professional act. Now, just reporting back from the field, that is met with skepticism from MSPs, right? I don't call it out, just wait until claim times comes around and we'll take care of you is generally met with skepticism by the populace, right? So we do have carriers, there are 3 carriers in particular that have said, we will put either an endorsement here or we will add language here, or here's our definition of AI, right? And it is called out within the policy that if an MSP has a loss or they have a lawsuit related to an AI related loss at the customer level, that there is express written coverage for those types of losses. So yes, if an MSP from MSP Alliance comes to us and says, hey, this is a thing for us, we have this exposure, we really, I mean, I don't want, I'll leave the names and location out to save the innocent, but one of the guys you sent me, Charles, we went through his whole risk profile and everything. And then on the back end, like the last question I asked him, I was like, talk to me about AI. And he was like, dude, we're AI to the teeth. And I was like, well, I've got a market that's got an agentic AI endorsement. And he kind of threw his hands in there and he was like, why the hell didn't you tell me that on the front end of the call? We could have just fast forwarded to this. I want that. Right. So yes, there are markets that are positioning products for MSPs that need that coverage. Yes.
Rob, given the diversity that, as Andy said, of the carriers out there and their relative maturity or relative different positions on AI, it seems really clear that having a good contract that is going to unilaterally protect the MSP and maybe the MSP customer on AI issues, because the MSP can't necessarily guarantee what the customer's policy might be negative to AI, right? So, I mean, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, the customer has to carry its own insurance. The MSP should have its own insurance. In today's day and age, I think you should move to a carrier that has a specific AI endorsement. If I was an MSP today, I wouldn't be in a policy that didn't have that. And for that reason alone, I would switch, because the probability is the vulnerabilities in the future are going to have more AI intersections. And so you want to have a policy that specifically deals with that. In addition, AI brings new risks, and you need specific exclusions in your customer contracts specific to AI. There's nothing in a normal MSA for managed services that talks about hallucination risk or regulatory compliance risk. What if they make it illegal? And so there's a lot of unknowns with AI, and therefore contracting carefully and having the right insurance become the only ways to really protect the MSP in 2026.
And I'll tell you, to piggyback off of that, Rob and Charles, like we are at UConn, we are trying our best to influence and coach these markets towards what good looks like. Historic MSP underwriting is not good, right? I mean, we could do a whole separate, podcast on that and kind of the history of E&O underwriting, but we're trying to influence the largest insurers in the world that we're on with monthly or quarterly that, hey, you should care when you're, guys, we're in the AJI. This is what we're talking about, right? You can use Claude, you can use ChatGPT, and you can pull in a customer MSA now and run that through in 30, 45 seconds to see if it's got the right language in there. Like, use the technology that, do the thing that we're talking about here. So we're constantly working with these markets to help them develop products and develop underwriting practices that reward and kind of set the guardrails for what good looks like. And I mean, to kind of pull the whole thing back to circle, like, what does mature mean? Because historically, I don't feel like MSP underwriting from the carrier side rewarded MSP maturity.
So that brings us quite nicely into the lightning round, our final round. So I want to thank both of you in advance for your time. But we're now in the official 60-day period review by the Department of Defense, reviewing their CMMC pause. And Rob, you and I talked about this so long ago, and it sometimes feel like we just talk about it. And, I finally feel like people are starting to pay attention, and I think they are. But we had the choice as a profession that MSPs would either become compulsorily licensed by the state, or they're going to voluntarily submit to certification. I don't think that anybody that we're talking to wants licensure. They just couldn't do it. They couldn't do it well, even if they wanted to do it. And I think certification is the path forward. As we go into this new era, it's not going to be certification by itself. It's going to be certification with appropriate contracts, with appropriate insurance. And all three of these elements must operate together, because that's what the powers that be want to see, whether it's the federal government, Department of Defense, whether it's the FDIC, whether it's any of the 17 national critical infrastructure sectors that are all genuinely concerned about their sectors from cyber. And what's the one thing they all know? We don't win this without the help of the MSP. So I just like to finish this thought with your opinions, both of you, on how best to integrate these three kind of pillars of MSP maturity so that they're working together. Rob, do you want to kick that off?
Look, the way I think about it is our relationship between our organizations has made it easy, because you can enter any one of our organizations and access this plan. So if you start at Maunder, you're going to get introduced to Andy when the insurance review arises. If you start with Andy, you're going to get introduced to Maunder when the contract review question comes up. And similarly with verification and certification with the MSP Alliance. But working with all three organizations, each of us individually will be focusing on our part, but together you get a comprehensive risk management solution, because we're all working together for a common purpose, which is to protect the MSP. Our customer contracts work hand in hand with the insurance policies and defense that UConn's insurance policies and their carriers provide. Charles's organization gives us the maturity data and the documentation to defend cases successfully in court. All of these things work together to keep the MSP protected, to keep claims low so insurance can be affordable, and MSPs that invest in moving up this maturity ladder get to benefit from savings in terms of their cost. We had one client that saved $7,000 on their E&O renewal just because of the maturity level that they attained with verification and with implementing appropriate contracts. That's why this program exists. That's why it's important that all three work closely together, because when they work together, they protect the MSP the best.
Andy?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to respond to your comment about statewide licensure. And I would just like to interject my opinion that If I had the choice between my state of Arkansas licensing and, an MSP and them being audited through Cyber Verify, I'm going to choose Charles Weaver 100 times out of 100 because I've seen how the state of Arkansas handles cyber, right? So we haven't talked about this outside of the podcast, but I'm with you guys squarely that it should not exist at the state level. What I've seen as a Southerner from Arkansas and Texas and Oklahoma and Tennessee is that statewide government has no clue how to do this the right way. Full offense to anybody listening, not no offense, but full offense. We've not done a good job of this at the state government level. So it shouldn't land at the statewide. And I like, if anybody listening to this has the idea of, if they're still after an hour, the idea that this is a sales pitch, let me suck the air out of that right now. Every salesperson wants you to spend money with them first, right? I 1000% want you to go through Cyber Verify first, and I want you to go through a Mondra MSA first before you come to me. If you can do those things, right, I want you to spend your money with the other guy first. To Rob's point, we are going to be able to present you like a shiny bride to the insurance market. We, in the last month, Rob mentioned, had one that the existing or the expiring coverage was 25 grand, got them in at 18 grand. Had another one, the expiring was at 9,500, got them in at 5,500, right? So we can take Cyber Verify documentation. We can take your application. We can take a Mondra MSA, and we can present you to our markets that are listening. Like I said, guys, there's 50, 60 markets out there. We've got about 15 that want to write E&O. Of those 15 right now, we've got about 3 or 4 that are actually going, hey, tell us how to be better, right? And we can take your risk with that Cyber Verify documentation and a Mondra MSA and go, here's what good looks like. Now give us credit for it.
Something tells me that the folks over at the Department of Defense and other sectors, other agencies, parts of the federal government and other governments throughout the world are all paying attention to what you guys just said, because if it's useful for underwriting, it's going to be damned useful for their purposes as well.
Yes.
100%.
I'd like to thank Rob Scott from Mondra, Andy Runyon from UConn for joining us today. Thank you for listening to the MSP Zone. If you are in the Chicago area at the end of August, and you would like to meet either of these two inspiring and very intelligent individuals, if you would like to have your contracts reviewed, make sure that they're appropriately updated with the right limitations that Rob talked about, the right AI inclusions. If you want to have your insurance policy reviewed by Andy and his team, make sure it has all the appropriate coverage. It's at the right limits for your MSP practice. Definitely encourage you to come to Chicago. Go to msplines.com. You can register for the event. It's a one-day event, and not only will you learn a lot more about the industry, be able to share it with your MSP peers, but be able to talk to these gentlemen, talk about insurance, talk about contracts, talk about certification, whatever you want to talk about. Gentlemen, thanks very much for coming on, and I hope to see you both again. I think these are really useful discussions, so appreciate it.
Thank you, Charles. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, appreciate the opportunity, man. Thanks for the platform.
Stay safe. Until next time.